Honest Thomas, Honesty. Written by author Leshone Hosea Jackson. Mr. Elder Jackson, January 11th, 2025. Proverbs 12 verse 22 says, "The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy." Honest Thomas was in Mrs. Peterson's K for class. He wasn't the tallest or the fastest runner, but he was known for one thing: telling the truth, even when it was hard. One sunny afternoon, Mrs. Peterson brought in a beautiful glass jar filled with colorful gumballs. "This," she announced, her eyes twinkling, "is a guessing game. Whoever guesses the closest to the number of gumballs inside gets to take the whole jar home." The class buzzed with excitement. Kids whispered numbers to each other, pointing at the jar, trying to estimate. Thomas stared at the jar, his brow furrowed in concentration. He counted imaginary rows and columns in his head. Later, as everyone wrote their guesses on slips of paper, Thomas overheard two of his classmates, Billy and Sarah, talking. "I'm going to write 200, Billy whispered. "But there can't be that many," Sarah replied, looking doubtful. "I know," Billy grinned, "but if I write a really big number, I have a better chance of being close." Thomas's stomach did a little flip-flop. He knew that wasn't right. He walked over to Mrs. Peterson, his small hand clutching his guess. "Mrs. Peterson," he asked quietly, "Billy and Sarah are writing big numbers even though they don't think that's how many gumballs are in there." Mrs. Peterson knelt down, her eyes kind. "Thank you for telling me, Thomas," she said gently. She then addressed the whole class, reminding them that the game was about making their best guess, not just writing a random number. Billy and Sarah looked down, a little embarrassed. Billy erased his 200 and wrote a more reasonable guess. When Mrs. Peterson finally counted the gumballs, the answer was 112. Thomas had guessed 110. He was the winner. As Thomas carefully carried the jar of gumballs home, he felt a warm, happy feeling inside. It wasn't just about winning the gumballs. It was about telling the truth, even when it was difficult. He remembered what his mom had read to him from the Bible: "The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy." Proverbs 12 verse 22. He knew that being honest was more important than anything, even a jar full of gumballs. From that day on, everyone in Mrs. Peterson's class knew that Honest Thomas wasn't just a nickname, it was who he was. The end.